Okay, I have hit the record button and we're going to start. Welcome to this session of the Microschool Summit. Kaity Broadbent is our speaker. Kaity is the head of learning at Prenda. Prenda is on a mission to empower learners by helping families and entrepreneurs create learning environments where young humans can thrive. Prior to Prenda, Kaity was a speech-language pathologist. She worked with students in public schools as well as with stroke victims in medical settings. Over the last decade, she has been focused on understanding the underlying factors in student motivation and engagement, as well as the vital roles that connection and relationship play in mental health and education. Over the years, she has developed curriculum, homeschooled, built schools, blogged, coached, and mothered her 4 amazing kids. Kaity also moonlights as Adventure Kait in Prenda's literacy program, Treasure Hunt Reading, which is available online for free at treasurehunt.prenda.co to anyone with the internet. Kaity, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm so excited after that first session. That was like just so invigorating and like, oh, I'm just so excited. And I'm excited to be here with all of you. And I'm excited that this is a Zoom room so we can chat a little bit if our group is small enough, which is great. You all have the advantage of me that you can see me, but I can't see your faces. So I'm going to pretend that everyone is just smiling from ear to ear and loving this. So that's what I'm pretending. Oh, thank you, Tom, for a little bit of evidence. Thank you. Yeah, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Like this will be really fun. Thank you, Peggy. I'm gonna share my screen here. And hopefully I don't click any of the wrong buttons. Okay, is that good? Can you see? Tom, can you give me a thumbs up? Okay, awesome. So I'm gonna talk about Prenda. Like we already kind of in the first session really heard the origin story from Kelly, and that's like, you know, Kelly's where it all started. So this is going to be more of like a deep dive, and you can put questions in chat, or if you want me to address any specific things, like I'm happy to just derail and do that. But yeah, this will be great. Okay, so this is kind of just some numbers. At Prenda, we really we are simultaneously driven by relationship and connection and data. So kind of an odd pairing. Those things are typically at odds sometimes, but we love them both. So we've been running since 2018. We're going into our 5th school year. Prenda existed long before that as Code Club, which Kelly addressed in the other sessions. I won't go into that. But as far as microschools go, Kelly did his first microschool in the winter, January of 2018. Since then, we have in total served over 7,000 students, and we have helped start over 1,000 microschools. And I love that session started off with what is a microschool, because that is just the top of mind question for everyone. So we're going to kind of address that first, but quickly, I wanted to just go over our mission as Prenda. Our mission is to empower learners. And you know, what is a learner? It's someone who's obsessed with gaining new knowledge, developing new skills, and mastering new things. What are we talking about when we use the word empower? We mean to help someone find power and to increase the belief that they can do anything and become anything. So that's what empowering learners means to us, and everything that we do at Prenda is really driven by that. From the inception, I remember, go a little bit into origin story. I remember after we had maybe like 10 microschools, this was really early on, we had this meeting where we were trying to develop our mission statement and our core values, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But this idea of empowering learners was on the table, and Kelly was adamant that this mission statement be super clear and only 2 words. And we played with some other words like create learners, or you know, we had some other things on the docket, and we realized that this word empower was really important because instead of something like create, it notes that the power is already within that human, right? Our job is to just let that power come out, to turn up the volume on that, not to actually create or engender something uniquely. It's already there. And when we approach a child with that kind of mentality, we respect that child at a deep level that changes how we treat them, which then changes how they act and who they become. So when we say empower learners, there's a lot of meaning and depth wrapped into that for the Prenda team. So it might sound kind of like a cliche phrase, but it's very meaningful to us and we stay very focused on it. So there's lots of words on Zoom calls. And so I thought we'd do something more visual. There's so many small schools, nano schools, like all of these beautiful, unique approaches to education. And we just want to like really respect all of them. When we talk about Prenda, we don't want to come across as conveying that we think Prenda is the best thing or the only thing or the right answer. Like the right answer is what's right for that family, that child, that at that time in their life. And the more choice and the more like creative things going on in the education space that can serve all of those needs, the more eclectic and beautiful the education landscape can become. So we love being a part of this community and look to everyone else starting schools and doing micro schools or homeschooling or anything off the beaten path as we look to as a companion and a partner. And we love that. But I just wanted to kind of go into a little bit about what Prenda microschool means, because that definition is so varied. But instead of telling you, I'm just going to show you. So you can just sit back and relax. And this is what a Prenda microschool looks like. And I will note here that this is our Nairobi friends that were in the other session. So shout out. So you can see that it's very eclectic, right? Microschools, a Prenda microschool is very flexible. The nuts and bolts of this is just a learning guide and between 5 and 10 learners from at least 2 different families. So it can be very small. It can be larger, up to 10. We have some microschool guides that run multiple sessions. So they actually have 20 students running at different times. So you can expand that way, but that's in pictures what a microschool is to us. So now I'm going to dive into our philosophy a little bit. And I love the point that was made in the last session that just because a school is small, just because there are fewer kids, doesn't mean there's anything inherently different about that school. And you can do the traditional model of education with fewer kids, and you can still, use all the same methods, and you will get all of the same results. So it's more than just fewer kids. It's a completely different way of thinking about education, the purpose of education, and the role of that adult in that room. And we're going to talk through philosophy, and then I'll actually go into all of the roles that are involved at Prenda. So at Prenda, we have 5 main priorities: personalization, mastery, ownership, inquiry, and psychological safety. Personalization, what we mean is that every student deserves an adaptive, differentiated learning experience. In the traditional model of education, which I will say is not the enemy and not always bad. It's kind of the status quo. So that's kind of what everything gets compared to. But there are lots of beautiful things going on in our public schools. There are many well-intentioned educators and families having wonderful experiences, and we really want to celebrate that too. Something that a small group allows for is more personalization. So that's one of the reasons that microschools have kind of cropped up lately, is that families have started looking for more personalization. In a traditional model with one teacher and a lot of students, it's very difficult for that teacher to give each student what they need to differentiate their instruction. So you get something that looks like whole group instruction and that for a few minutes, and then they'll try to differentiate into different groups. And this can be helpful, but sometimes it can also be demeaning, because every kid knows if you're in like the star reading group or the square reading group, you kind of get tracked and like targeted a little bit. And that can be really demoralizing, especially early on in your education, where you're really still identifying yourself as a learner and how you interact and how being a learner is part of or not part of your identity. And so keeping our model really focused on giving each student that adaptive, differentiated experience every day, all the time. So you won't find any whole group instruction really in the Prenda model. Everything's personalized. There's still a lot of collaboration, which we'll go through later, but as far as core academics, everyone should be at what we call their learning frontier every day. That's code word for zone of proximal development, if you're a Vygotsky fan. The next one is mastery. You should have enough time to master the concepts without someone ushering you past where you need to stay. If you need more time, awesome. If you have mastered something, you should be allowed to move on. So that kind of self-pacing. Ownership, the idea that every student deserves to make meaningful decisions about their learning. And if you'll probably notice if you were in the last session, I loved how Gina called out self-determination theory and all of that good research. All of Prenda is built on all of that research. There's like 30 or 40 years of educational psychology and neuroscience research that substantiates all of these ideas and shows that when we focus on these things, we get certain results. And the results that you get when you focus on those things happen to be what most families really want for their kids. But it's just really hard to apply these principles in the traditional model because we have such a high ratio of student to teacher. You have to use different methods to kind of control that number of people and that number of kids. So then that influences what you're able to do. So the fourth one here is inquiry. Every student deserves to explore their own interests. And this is a really interesting one because Prenda exists in the publicly funded education space. Our curriculum is standards aligned, and in the traditional space, there's a lot of emphasis put on what to learn when. And so we've had a unique kind of time navigating that and building inquiry into our model. But it's still one of our core pillars. And even though there's some tension there, we fight for it every day. And I think our guides and our kids really appreciate that. It's literally what makes kids feel like they want to come to school. And then the fifth one, psychological safety or relatedness, if you're wanting to use self-determination theory language. And that's just that every student deserves to learn within the context of a supportive, encouraging relationship. I won't go into all of the neuroscience behind this right now, but I will just say that it is really important that every child have an adult in their life that is wild about them and excited to see them every day and believes in their inherent value. Cannot say those words without tearing up, sorry. I feel passionately about that, obviously. Then we have our core values. Start with heart, dare greatly, figure it out, foundation of trust, and learning over comfort. And these are the ideas and values that we hold our kids and our guides and our parents and our team accountable to. And I won't go through all of them, but we are very value-driven educational approach, we'll say. So I won't go through all of this, but there are essentially 5 components of a successful of our model. I won't say components, like 5 roles, five types of people. The first is the guide. Their main job is to inspire, coach, and nurture. And Kelly spoke to this in the last session about how we're not asking this person to do what a traditional classroom educator does. Their role is very different. And I love there's lots of bullets on here, but my favorite one is that they're supposed to help students to see learning as a gift and to learn how to manage their own autonomy. That's the main role of the guide. The next one is the learner. Their main job is to attempt, struggle, and persist. We work really, really hard on having it's a real change if a student is coming from a traditional model to have the student, even a very young student, even a kindergartner, feel like their job is to be responsible for their learning. And when you feel that from the adult perspective, you might think, that kid's 5, or that kid's 6, or that kid's 12, but he just typically does not make great decisions. Like giving them more responsibility is not a good idea. And it's not a very pervasive practice in society. But the research shows that the thing that makes kids able to project themselves into time, predict what their actions now will be tied to, what results that they're tied to in the future, set a goal, stay focused. All of those things are happening in the prefrontal cortex, which is not developed till a little bit later in life, but that part of your brain is developed by use. Okay, so if you don't give kids a little bit more responsibility than they're probably ready for, you're not growing or stretching that part of your brain. You're literally limiting how much brain development they can have, right? So they graduate and they're 18 and they're like, great, I can make decisions now, but I've never practiced that. Like I don't actually have the brain capacity to like understand that responsibility, that burden. So this is really important. Goes back to ownership. the caregiver or parent or guardian or family, whatever term you prefer. Their main role is to encourage, extend the learning, and to model. One of my favorite, I follow the Neufeld Institute, if you've heard of them. Gordon Neufeld, he's a Canadian developmental psychologist, and he does a lot of research into attachment theory and this idea of relatedness, if you go back to self-determination theory. And he says that a child's heart finds something to attach to and then becomes like it. So the single most important thing that you can do as a guide, as an educator, as a parent, is to become the kind of person that you want those children to become, and then build strong relationships where your influence can be felt. And then they'll care about your opinion enough to, think following your example is a good idea instead of like being repelled by that. It's a little tricky, but it can be done. So you'll see things like us coaching parents around building relationships where students feel unconditionally valued. We unintentionally tend to parent through fear a little bit because we want those good results. We want our kids to have good life outcomes. And we know that the path to that is doing well in school, going to a good college, getting a good career, all of these things. But there are lots of people in the world that don't do that path and still have very successful lives. But we live with this fear that if we don't keep our kids on those railroad tracks, that they're not going to have a good life, right? But there are many paths. And so we just try to encourage our parents to love unconditionally and support unconditionally, especially when that student fails, right? Like if you imagine your son or daughter coming to you with a bad test score or something like that, and you react with disappointment instead of pride, and that's a very natural reaction, they learn that only achievement makes you feel proud of them, like want to own them, want to have the public credit of like, this is my son, like we don't put bad test scores on the fridge. We don't go to the neighbors and say like, oh yeah, like my kid did really bad on the test. Like, we want we reserve those moments of pride and like sharing and like ownership for success instead of struggle. And so it's really reframing how we respond to our students' struggle to show them that in fact their learning, their mistakes is valuable to us, is totally acceptable, and they're even acceptable to us when they don't perform well. It's more important in those situations than when they succeed. The Prenda team is number 4. We are here to support, monitor, create systems. We've talked a lot about entrepreneurialism and branding in the first session, and that is a huge, huge lift for people who want to start schools. So you can kind of think of Prenda as like, you still get to start, you're an independent contractor. If you're a guide, you're going to still start your school, but we're going to like kind of do a lot of the heavy lifting for you with a brand and trust and data and support. A lot of our guides are just parents who needed a micro school, and we are able, there's training, there's support, there's community, so many awesome things to scale people up quickly and to help powerful people in the community do incredible things with kids, people who never thought that they would guide, make incredible guides. And then lastly, the school partner. Like I mentioned, we are like, I don't know the actual percent, I shouldn't say number, like 99% publicly funded. So we really value our school partnerships, charters, districts, etc. So their job is to serve, support, and fund. And we love our school partners. They provide special education services. They do all sorts of things that help Prenda be accessible to lots and lots of kids. So those are the roles. Go back real quick. So if you imagine your hand, right, very effective with 5 parts. But all of these roles aren't necessarily required. Like if you want to do Prenda in like a private pay situation, you just get rid of that school partner and you still have 4 components. If you want to do this in a homeschool capacity with your own kids, you don't need a guide. There's lots of different variability that we offer, but those are the core components. And I'm going to check my time. Okay. So our learning model, what do kids learn? What does learning look like at Prenda? And this has evolved a lot over the last 4 years. Just as we've watched people come into Prenda and we've listened to them, we really treat kids and guides like they're true customers. And we listen to what they need, what makes them happy, what makes them enjoy school, enjoy guiding. We really try to create experiences that that help people feel supported and like they can do things, right? That they have the tools that they need. So this is our learning model: connect, conquer, collaborate, and create. We don't divide the day by subjects. It's by like kind of purpose of the day instead of subject. And I won't go into this super detailed, but essentially connect mode is all about social emotional learning. And this is where we lay the foundation for that psychological safety, that relatedness that allows students to feel safe enough to take risk, where they don't feel like they have to defend themselves. They don't have to be smart. They don't have to be right in order to gain value in their community. Instead, they're infinitely valued immediately and allowed to take risks, right? So this is kind of where we're laying the bedrock of that culture, really. And so there's 4 components, and you'll definitely see the self-determination theory coming in here: community, autonomy, mindset, and purpose. And what we found, we didn't have this the first few years that we did Prenda, and some kids were like really successful. Some guys were really successful. They understood how to balance autonomy with expectations and boundaries and things like that. But a lot of kids were not able to handle the level of autonomy that we were giving them. They needed to be taught, actually, encouraged and supported in managing their own autonomy, because it wasn't something that had happened for them up until this time in their life. So we developed this program that actually helps guides and students and parents understand how to live this way and how to have the mindset of a learner and to be purpose driven and to manage your autonomy and to build a learning community. So now that we have this kind of pillar, we find that the culture in a learning environment is much stronger. The next part's conquer. We use a lot of blended learning tools. Here are some of them. This is not an exhaustive list. We do adaptive diagnostic testing. We're very data driven, and that we don't use the data as a weapon. We give it to the child and say, here, this is where you're at. And sometimes that's hard for kids to realize that they're quote unquote behind, but we try really hard to destigmatize that, to say that everyone starts where they need to start. All of this like grade level, age, what you should know, it's kind of more or less made up. You don't need to worry about that. We just need to know where you're at, where you want to go, and why you want to go there. And then we can get you the tools and the experiences that you need to move forward. And that's that guide's role, to connect and curate that, to help each student reach their purpose. In collaborate mode, we do a lot of whole group activities. We do Socratic discussions, debates, problem solving, coding, logic, math, music, baking, poetry, tea time, service, entrepreneurialism. There's like a whole smorgasbord of things that happen in collaborate mode. But the whole point is that we're together, and we're mostly focusing on social studies and math in this area, but there's lots of there's tons of flexibility. We give people lots of tools that they can use. They don't have to use, but that are available for their use during this time, so that they can connect to good information and good research and really drive their learning. Create mode, this is our project-based learning foundation. So we have a huge library of project-based learning activities that students choose themselves. It walks them through a design process and then logging into a portfolio. And I'm running out of time, so I'm going to stop. I'm going to skip that. We're going to do this. So in the last session, Gina was talking about this tipping point, right? And my feeling on this is that we will not see this tipping point. I think we're close, but until we have the data, that body of evidence to really substantiate that this is a safe alternate path. There's a lot of risk involved in doing something that seems untested, right? If you're just kind of a mainstream parent who's never homeschooled or done anything different before, it's kind of like when you're walking on a stepping stone path, you want to see that next stepping stone before you take your step. And I think a lot of people kind of, some people don't need that. They just trudge through and nothing stops them. But some people really need to see that next step and know that that's going to be a sure place to land. And so we're trying to give that to people through data and to really substantiate both the ideas of strong academics, but also this idea of empowerment, and to actually measure empowerment in data-driven ways. So I'm going to go through that a little bit. So we essentially have an equation, and I will say this is a hypothesis that we've been running for the last few years, and it may get tweaked in the future as we learn. We are all empowered learners at Prenda, always learning from things. But the four main components in this equation are intrinsic motivation. We talked a ton about this in last session. Positive relationship with learning. They see themselves as a learner. They enjoy learning. Personalized differentiation, which means that they feel like they're at that sweet spot every day where they're like challenged, but not over challenged, and they're not bored. And then their perceived control over their education. And then for academics, we look at their math and reading achievement and their math and reading growth. And typically in traditional education, math and reading achievement is pretty much all that anyone talks about. We talk about growth a little bit, but not quite as much. And so I'm trying to bring a little bit of balance to that data, and how we as a country, as a society, really look at and judge success, right? Trying to round this out so we can actually we can celebrate success that doesn't only talk about math and reading achievement. It's much broader than that. People are deeper than that. There are more forms of intelligence and talents than that we really want to capitalize on and celebrate. Kind of already went over this. There's lots of research that shows that when you focus on this stuff, you get better mental well-being, engagement, resilience, and academic achievement. And so I'm going to just kind of briefly, we won't go over all of these numbers, but essentially just like take in how much red there is on here, and red in this case is negative. We interview or we survey all of our kids when they come in about their pre-Prenda experience. And I'll just highlight a few of these. Before Prenda, how in control of your learning did you feel? Only 18.6% of kids are saying they felt very in control. Pacing and challenge of school before Prenda, 23% saying too fast, 41% saying too slow. Only 34% of kids are saying like, this is just right for me. And the fuller question here is that my teacher was teaching something that I could understand, and I felt like I was learning new things every day, right? So it's only hitting a third of the kids. Extrinsic motivation, very high. The highest indicators for why, when students are asked, why do you do your learning? I don't want to get in trouble. I want to get good grades. Those are kind of the driving forces. Before starting Prenda, going to school was mostly, and then they fill in a word, boring, stressful, scary, or fun, exciting, interesting. And then before starting Prenda, did you have any issues with bullying or feeling safe at school? 32% of kids said yes. So this is why we care so much about our priorities and our learning model and setting kids up for success, and why we prioritize things like control, things like feeling safe, intrinsic motivation. Like our kids are trying to tell us, they're desperately trying to tell us that there are some things that are off for them, but no one's asking them. They literally do not have a voice. And it is becoming more and more apparent as we see the rise in the mental health crisis in our youth population, that things are not right for them. And they're trying to tell us, but like no one's seeing from their standpoint, it really seems like nothing's listening, or no one's listening. And I actually gave this talk a few weeks ago at a different conference, and one of the camera operators, who's like a 17-year-old kid, and came up to me and afterwards and just thanked me. He's like, this is real. And no, I've never heard these words come out of an adult's mouth before. And just thank you for like being our voice. I'm like, oh man, we need to elevate this voice, and we need to respond to it with love and care and precision. With all the expertise in the world, like surely we can address these needs. So then we post-survey them. This is just mid-year this year, and you can see these jumps. On average, we have a 45% increase in kids reporting that they feel in control, they're at their learning frontier, that they have a positive relationship with learning, and that they're intrinsically motivated. So for us, when we see these numbers, we know the thing that we've created is actually tied to empowering learners. And that's powerful. If we see these numbers are low, we go back to the drawing board and we try again. We do more kid interviews, guide interviews, we reevaluate. But these are good trends, right? Academics, this is just a screenshot of some full benchmark data. This was last year's data. We had 19% of kids move from not on grade level to grade level. That said achievement. And oh, sorry, that's growth. And then achievement, we were 2% higher than national statistics in math, and 6% higher in national statistics for reading. So strong academics and empowerment can be done. And our kids on average move about 1.5 years in math and reading. So solid academics, guys, we can do it. It's very possible. Kids that come in very behind, I just always want to put behind in quotes because I don't ever feel like it's actually behind, you know, like there's no, there are lots of documents that say you should learn X by this date or by this age, but like in true humanhood, like there's no reason that you can't learn that earlier or later, you know. So we use that language sometimes, but it's kind of false. So we've found that 38% of kids who come to us 1 or more grade levels below, they've caught up a whole grade level after 6 months in Prenda, just being at their learning frontier every day. And then we've seen a 33% gain in students who are working above grade level in our language curriculum, which is really motivating and inspiring. Good job, kids. And then we are growing. So if you want to bring Prenda to your state, that is possible. We can talk more. And I will stop. And I haven't been monitoring the chat, but I think we're supposed to have like 15 minutes of questions. Right, Steve?
Yes, and I don't think there were any questions. There's been some good back and forth. Tom's answered. I guess Tom has answered some questions there. There was this interesting moment when Tom answered about feeling like he was a better parent after understanding the material. And I feel like that's a really interesting thing to kind of drill down on, because not only do kids benefit from becoming more competent and feeling more confident, parents also feel more confident when they feel competent as a parent. They know how to deal with things and they know what they're doing. And we don't do a very good job of helping parents feel that way. So I loved that comment.
Yeah, I love that too. I think there's so much powerful evidence for the idea that shifting the dynamic between parents or just adults and children, the benefits of it are enormous. And as soon as you show parents, look, here's what's happening when you behave in way A, and here's what happens when you behave in way B, and just educate them about that evidence and that the logical underpinnings of that, we've seen parents make 180-degree shifts in how they treat kids, which then, like, the trickle down of that is the student starts to believe something different about themselves, and they show up to their life and to their learning way different. And that's super powerful. Yeah, someone asked me to put this slide back up. Is this good? You can take a screenshot if you want. Or we can share this out. Perfect. Curious how you met. Oh, yes. Yeah, so we actually evaluate that. We do a pre-test, like a pre-survey when they come in, and then we do a post-survey that's like a little bit of a deeper dive. But then every week in our platform, they do something called a weekly reflection that asks them kind of like a rotating series of questions that asks them to just reflect on the last week. And those empowerment questions are kind of built into that. So we actually have like weekly pulse data on lots of our kids for this is where we get that, those numbers.
I am interested in the way that you've combined institutional structure and pedagogy, meaning you sort of have hit the two kind of key points. Again, being a micro school doesn't necessarily mean you have that same kind of student-driven pedagogy, but it does seem like you've hit both very cleanly.
Yeah, that's what we're going for, and really just articulating like what success looks like. It's interesting because education as a whole is like a highly regulated, highly metric driven, right? We want those test scores to go up and we want all these numbers to change. And then we, depending on what we're measuring, that changes our behavior, right? Like if we need those test scores to go up, we're doing flashcard drills, we're doing bubble sheets. Like it changes the behavior depending on what you measure. And so when we measure these things and we show that back, that changes behavior in a good way, right? Like we can use data to like advocate for students and say, look, hey guide, hey parent, your student is telling us that they are not in control and that they still don't feel like they're a learner. And like all of these, you know, and we can respond to that and say, hey kid, what's wrong with your environment? Like, what would you like to see changed? How could we move these numbers instead of like, how can we move the math achievement number? And kids are really open to coming to this table and telling you what they need as a person and what's missing. And when you fill that need, magic ensues. Like as soon as you, and we really try hard to emphasize to guides and parents that all behavior from kids is information, right? There's no such thing as a bad kid or a troublemaker. There are kids that have needs that are not being met. And in the same way that you would, as a gardener, wouldn't walk up to a plant with like crispy, dry leaves and be like, what are you doing, plant? Like, you're so lazy, or like, you just don't want to try, or like, you're just trying to make my life hard. Like things that we'd say about kids in our not so finest moments. You wouldn't say that to a plant. You'd say, oh, like, I forgot to water you. Like, you need water. You need to be in the shade more. Like, you would respond to that need. All of student behavior is just them trying to tell you what they need, and they don't have the language to do it. They can't tell you that they don't feel emotionally accepted. They don't have those words, right? So they act out. It's on us to kind of like notice that and respond to the underpinning cause of those things. That takes a lot of change from adults, but it's something that we as adults need to commit to.
So I always call that the Caesar Milan method, right? It's not your dog, right? You think the problem is your dog, but actually it's not your dog. Hey, I want to ask you a challenging question.
Okay.
So a lot of this is focused on what we would call traditional academic success. Mm-hmm. And my dad was dean of admissions at Stanford. He was dean of admissions at Princeton. He was chairman of the college board, which doesn't mean anything about me, but it gives me the perspective of having grown up in a very interesting environment. And the question I like to ask people is, what percentage of high school students graduate as competent adults? And I suggest that there are a lot of life skills that aren't really a part of the academic program. So you could graduate top of your class, but you don't actually know how to live on your own or hold a job or start a family. So how does Prenda think about those kinds of skills?
Yeah, so important. Those 21st century like soft skills are, and just like life skills in general, are just baked into everything that we do. We have like articulated rubrics and like purposes for all of our methods and like activities on the curriculum team, and very few of them are drive academic growth. Like there's like a narrow like band of where it's like, that's where we're doing this, like we're still checking those boxes and we're going to get that. But the rest of it really is how do we teach kids how to think? How do we teach them how to figure something out? How do we teach them how to like figure out where they might go for more information? We only serve kids that are K through 8th right now. We're not doing high school at the moment. So that kind of like helping kids launch into society is kind of out of our purview right now. But we find that our students who are just in middle school have a lot of these independence skills that their same age peers lack. Even my own kids, I have right now a 3rd grader and a 2nd grader. They can look at a thing that another kid is doing and they'll be like, why would they do that? Like they have enough sense and like, life experience already to be able to like think and evaluate for themselves. They have those prefrontal cortex skills, which I think are kind of the crux of success in the way that you're describing. Like, how can you be a successful adult? It's largely to do with prefrontal cortex development. And so everything that we do with agency and autonomy, like that is with the aim of developing that part of the brain.
So what about temperaments?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So as the parent of several children, you recognize pretty quickly that they come differently, that they have different ways of being in the world. So what about the student for whom those kind of prefrontal cortex kinds of things aren't really the strong suit for them? They're physical, they're athletic, right. Something else.
Yeah, I think that in collaborate mode and create mode, there's lots of opportunity for kids to develop and be celebrated for different types of intelligence. We love the analogy of like the lining up a giraffe and a monkey and an elephant and asking them all to climb a tree. Like everyone has a unique strength. And we want actually, when we do camp at the beginning, purpose is actually the first thing that they do is they all kind of try to push themselves into the future a little bit, and they design what we call their future you or future self. And the goal is to paint the picture of who you want to become. What are your strengths? What are your interests? Like, let's put that on a board and let's celebrate that, and help you cultivate that as an identity, and ask the question, how might I use that strength and skill to do something awesome in the world, right? We ask not just what do you want to do? Like, that's a very like stagnant, kind of sterile question. We ask things like, what kind of person do you want to be? What kind of legacy do you want to leave? What problems in the world do you see that really bother you? Maybe you were built to solve those problems, and there's going to be a whole host of varying skills and strengths that are needed to solve that problem. And with a little creativity, you can find a way into that problem space using your strengths.
Katie, there's a question from Beth. Is it realistic to begin a micro school in fall 2022, or are those
Easy.
lofty expectations?
Nope, totally possible. Yep, that's very doable. It takes about a month to become a guide. So you just set a start. It depends on what state you're in. We have to do a background check, you know, fingerprint card. There's lots of kind of logistical safety stuff, but as soon as you have that handled, you can onboard and we can train you, and you can recruit a class. Definitely can do it by the fall.
So why don't we stop there if it's okay with you?
Sure.
Give people a couple of minutes break before the next 2 sessions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was so fun. Thanks for everyone who participated.
Thanks, everybody. Bye now.